right. We have a rather intricate presentation, of course, so we have like 4 people up on stage. Hello, everybody. I'm David Blevins, Tomitribe, and we have Heiko. You can go ahead and introduce yourself because you have a...
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, my name is Heiko Braun. I'm from Red Hat, working on Wildfly Swarm.
Hi, I'm Alistair Nottingham. I work on Webs for Liberty.
My name's Mike, and I'm here with Payara.
I'm Andy Gumbrecht. I'm actually an employee from David and Tomitribe.
Okay. So we're here introducing the MicroProfile. And the MicroProfile is an interesting thing that we kind of launched up in around June to see what we can do to kind of move things forward around the story of microservices kind of in the EE space, more or less, but just sort of enterprise Java in general as far as our platforms are concerned. I think it kind of started organically as a lot of conversations that we're having about our different approaches to microservices, to Uber jars, to packaging, what we're doing in the metrics space, and various conversations like that. And so eventually we decided to come together and actually form a project, officially announce it, give it a name, and kind of put a stamp on this collaborative effort and see what we can do to move things forward at a slightly faster pace than we have before. So we have launched off, of course, the 4 of us plus the LJC, and South Java has joined up. As well as a nice little new entry to the ecosystem called Hammock, which is Savoir Technologies, and so we came out with the philosophy of wanting to improve the standards process a bit by having some shorter cycles, a little bit more iterative. Typically, we've had maybe 3 years between kind of major EE versions. And one of the reasons for that is, I think, because we're not collaborating before we actually try to standardize things as much as we should. And so that's one of the things that we're attempting to solve with the MicroProfile is really a community to be collaborating on the various aspects around microservices, try things out, see what works, see what doesn't, iterate quickly, fail fast, I believe is a great way to describe it. And then as things become more proven, flushed out, those can go up and become part of the standard. And so, one of the things that you always hear about when people talk about something like, this old topic we love, Spring versus EE, they always say, is EE innovating? And the answer is standards aren't supposed to innovate. That's not what they're there for. They're there to collect the proven ideas that have been flushed out and make them standard. So if you look at the last, say, 15 or 10 years of standards in the EE space, you see a couple examples where we guessed at what the right answer was, and those typically haven't worked out very well. CMP is pretty much the boogeyman of that argument. And so, CMP wasn't really used in the wild for a significant number of any at all, and it was designed and thought of in the spec group, and then pushed out to the world to limited success and a lot of pain for us all. And that's an example of what happens when a spec tries to innovate. And then you have the same area. You take JPA, which started up basically as a very successful open source project, Hibernate, and then became part of a standard in kind of abstracting out things that Hibernate does and various things like that. And that is a very successful example of a standard. So what we did as part of, when basically we took Hibernate, we ended up with 2 more Hibernates. We ended up with Eclipse Link and OpenJPA, all which came into existence as a result of standardizing something that Hibernate was basically innovating and doing. So our reward for that was 2 more Hibernates, and that's not a bad thing for the industry. And so we're trying to go really iteratively, really quickly, because the world of microservices is changing so very fast. 2-3 years is not enough. It's not fast enough. And so we want to try and be very focused, topic at a time, bang out and flesh out some things, and then basically call that, version 1.1, version 1.2, so on and so forth. So we did come out with version 1.0 of MicroProfile right before Java 1, and it contains just CDI, JAX-RS, and JSON-P. It was intentionally minimal, so I'll talk about the decision-making behind why it was so minimal. But the shorter answer is because we wanted to include you in the process. We actually did launch off a survey. It's on the front page of the MicroProfile IO website that you can take. We did get so far almost about 3,000 people take that survey, which is a pretty good turnout. Okay, so right now where we're headed at is basically we started as very informal. We launched off a website. We have a GitHub project. And now we're in the process of taking what has been created and what's been talked about and moving it into an open source foundation. So we chose Eclipse Foundation, and we actually have a proposal to the Eclipse Foundation that's there. It's being reviewed, and it should be voted on at the next board meeting. And then we would officially be a part of the Eclipse Foundation. And I guess I've given a lot of talks about standards in the JCP, and I'm an extremely huge fan of the JCP. And I view this as a great way for us to feed things into the JCP quicker. It's also a really great way to make sure that they're open source, which is a very critical thing. So, in this space, we have CDI, bean validation, and the @inject spec, which are open source specifications, and the rest are effectively proprietary. And so, if we are able to create more technologies in a nonprofit foundation, and then have that foundation basically be the spec lead when we move things into a JSR format, we create more open source technology in the enterprise Java space, which is a very good thing for us all. And what we're trying to achieve there is have greater meritocracy inside how things work in the project, have voting. If someone wants to bow out for a round of MicroProfile, we'll probably have elections on a regular basis and just don't run. And the community will be able to elect the leadership, the people who make the decisions, and that would guarantee that you control the fate of the technology. I think it's a very important thing for us to establish. And if we can get this pattern going, I think we can apply it to help the velocity of the JCP in a very significant way, and help the community-oriented aspects that have already been happening in the JCP fuel that even more. Okay, so we did put together a demo, and so when we launched off, we had a really fun conversation about, the very first thing we talked about, we're going to make a sample app, right? That shows what you can do with the MicroProfile. And then, we instantly saw why are we making a sample app, like a single app? This is supposed to show microservices, and how interesting is it if you show microservice, right? Just one. So we decided, all right, we're gonna take a different approach, which is sort of a new thing that popped up that I don't think would have happened otherwise. And so we decided, all right, we have 4 of us here at the table. We're gonna make 4 services, 1 each, and one's gonna run on Liberty, one's gonna run on Wildfly Swarm, one's gonna run on Tommy, one's gonna run on Payara. And then we're going to have something that ties it all together, and then we'll actually have to choke down the same problems that you have. And I think that's the most valuable part about it, is we are actually all now kind of hacking on one code base with 4 apps in it, actually 5 if you consider the UI, and we're even running each other's servers. And we've even had a situation where one of us patched the other one. And we've been just kind of contributing to each other's stuff, which is sort of a crazy occurrence. So we don't have a sample app, but we do have a sample architecture, which I think is a really, really neat thing. And there's been some things that we've been learning from that, which I think are quite interesting. But So we're going to show you what we've cooked up in terms of demo, but understand that this is just a learning vehicle. This is not like, ta-da, this is the MicroProfile, this demo. This is just what we're using to have use case-driven approach to figuring out what it is that we need to do, and as a community, to move things in the right direction, because I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruit and things we don't agree on, and we are starting to see that ourselves in this work that we're doing. So first, we're gonna have Heiko pop up, and he's gonna show his service that Wildfly wrote, and then we're gonna go down the line, and then we're gonna do the UI, and we're gonna continue on with the presentation. So,
okay. So the overall idea behind that demo architecture or reference architecture that we came up with is basically it's resembling a conference application. So you get things like sessions, ratings for the sessions, you get information about speakers, etc. So as we move along and when we look at all of the different services implemented on each vendor's runtime, everyone brings up one kind of like bounded context, so to say. It's still just a playground, so don't take it too serious, but the important point here is when we leave the room today, it's intended for you to kind of like go back, check it out, work through it, take a look at the different implementations, what they bring to the table, how they work, and how they operate. So in the next few minutes, everybody from us is going to say a little bit like what the implementation details are, what we implemented and how it works, but there's obviously much more than we can cover today, so I encourage you to kind of like look at it for yourself later on. The team behind Swarm was asked to implement the session service, so that's providing like session information similar to the mobile app that we're using today to see what's going on at the DevOps. It exposes like the session data and some information about the speakers. I'm not going to dive into all the details regarding the APIs. It's basically just a simple CRUD API that you can use from a web front end, for instance, to poke into the service and ask for the schedule of a particular talk. You got IntelliJ running here somewhere, so. Okay. So rather than looking at the slides showing what the service is doing, I'm going to show you a little bit of code here. So if you go back to the GitHub repository, this is what you're going to see. Each service has a single repository, a custom Maven project built behind that, and some sources to it. So in our case, since we're based on the MicroProfile 1.0, it's basically a JAX-RS service plus some CDI beans implemented. The implementation is not that interesting, but what's interesting is how the POM actually looks, because this is where you start with Wildfly Swarm, for instance. It's actually...
It's code from Tuesday.
Yeah, I just need to quickly get my head around it. This is the other one. Okay. So what you see when you look at the session service, it has a single dependency on the Java EE APIs right here. There's nothing more to it than bringing in that particular dependency, plus some internal modules to bootstrap the application. But the relevant part to enable Wildfly Swarm actually happens. This is still the wrong one.
That's it.
Huh?
Do a search.
No. Are we looking at the right service? Just a second. I'm surprised I'm looking for the plugin that enables all of this.
Do a search from root.
Well, I think we do it right here. Has this been the one we've been using?
No. PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, right there. So forget about the code. I can't find the implementation details, and before I bore you, like digging through the code, finding it myself, I rather explain it right here. So when you enable Wildfly Swarm, that means you have a WAR project packaging type that brings in the Java EE APIs, and the way to make it work is you add a build plugin to it. The build plugin is in charge of kind of like depicting the runtime capabilities that that application particularly needs. And the output of that packaging process is then a self-contained binary, and that's something you see in all the vendor implementations today. So at the end, you've got one self-contained binary that you can use to start the service, and when I finish my talk and hand off to the other guys, this is what we all do, each in a row. So at the end, we should have 4 services running. Some key figures about all the services, we thought it might be interesting to the audience to see like how the different implementations compare. So we added some figures around the actual jar sizes being created. So in our case, we ended up with something like 65 megabytes for that application or that service. The service is able to start up in around about 6 seconds. Here in parentheses, it means to readiness, so when it's actually ready to serve requests. And the heap usage is around 40 megabytes. So depending on how you look at it, we here measured like the sum of the young and old generations. Our approach to the Überjar, basically the stuff that I wanted to show using code, is you add a build plugin. The Maven plugin or the Gradle plugin then is in charge of taking the application resources plus something that we call fractions, which are the runtime capabilities of the server, bake it together and output a self-contained binary. This also includes like the Maven repository, including all the dependencies the application requires, and it's something that you can hand off to another person to run it. Or you can send it off on the journey through CI, CD into production. Interesting here, just mentioning without taking up too much time for the others. So in Swarm, the MicroProfile for us isn't a profile like the web profile. It's really just yet another fraction, and the term or the concept of a fraction embodies basically most often a Java EE API, so JAX-RS for instance, and the supporting runtime services to make it work. So when you reference that particular fraction in our example, it enables the JAX-RS APIs plus the HTTP components underneath so that you effectively have a running REST endpoint at the end of the day. There's a large number of Java EE related capabilities that we currently have. Most of it is inherited from Wildfly, so it's a sidekick of Wildfly. All the core components come from that origin. Plus a large number of non-EE capabilities, so things that you need when you move into service-oriented architecture, so microservice architecture, so integration with service registries, single sign-on, circuit breaking capabilities, external configuration, health checking, a bunch of things. And so for us, and when you look at the demo, the MicroProfile capabilities are yet just another fraction that you can use. And in the most simple case, an application would look like having a single dependency on the MicroProfile, the build plugin. You run it, you build it, you run it, and then you're ready to go. Okay, and with this, I hand over.
You can show your service running.
Ah, I need to start it, right?
Yeah, well, it's already started, but you can stop it and show everybody. There you are.
Okay, we quickly stop this one, clean up. Here you see it's a little bit too small. Hopefully you can read it. How to run or execute the final result created by the Maven packaging plugin, or our Wildfly Swarm plugin that packages the self-contained binary. It's actually just a jar at the end of the day that you can Java jar, as you can see here. And what we're going to do is we assign it to a specific port so we can have all the different services running on this particular laptop without colliding with each other. There we go. To those of you familiar with Wildfly, that's the bootstrap output is quite the same. and there you are, ready to go. The microservice session was deployed, and we are ready to perform work.
I believe there's a window open. If you go to the browser.
I think we don't need to.
Okay, so our service was essentially to allow sessions to be rated. It's called the session voting service, and there are two kind of parts to it. One is the model, which is you have an attendee. The attendee has an ID and a name, and the rating, you've got an ID for the rating itself, the session ID, the attendee ID, and then the rating from 1 to 10. And the API is very simple. You can register an attendee, you can update an attendee, you can rate a session, you can update your ratings, you can change your rating afterwards. You can query all the session votes, you can get an average for a session. So I have never used IntelliJ before, so let's see how well I do with this. So the session is the service is in here, and if we look at the POM to see how this thing works, we have a whole load of properties which configure the liberty. So, for example, we set what the context for the application will be. We actually had a different approach from the other services because we bind a context root and then the REST service is bound to /, but everyone else's implementation binds a context root to / and then has a context root for the REST application, which I thought was an interesting difference. And there are a whole load of dependencies. So rather than depending on everything in Java-E, we limit it to just the things you need. So there's a... What did I do?
There you go.
Okay. Where was I? That's the okay. Yeah. So there's a POM which defines the APIs required for MicroProfile at compile time, and another one for use at runtime. And then all the way down below, there's kind of a load of magic relating to how to create the Uber jar. So this configures the Liberty plugin to know where everything is. And then somewhere down below, we actually say during packaging, deploy the application is here. And then below, it causes us to go and package it up as an Uber jar using this package server goal. And in the source code, there's a model. The model is a basic Java bean, so nothing particularly surprising here. And in the API, because we've just got JAX-RS and JSON-P, there isn't a JSON-B binding yet for JAX-RS. We have, our kind of implementation wants the Java Bean equivalent. We have a whole load of kind of providers which are here to convert from the JSON for J, not JSON for J, JSON-P representation into the object representation. So these are registered as message body readers and writer and do the marshalling and unmarshalling. And it makes me realize how much we need JSON-B because that's a lot of code, and there are 4 different classes, each with a lot of code in it. And then we've got the session vote, which is our JAX-RS component. In this case, we have 2 ways of storing information. One is non-persistent because MicroProfile doesn't have a persistent storage mechanism. The other one is using CouchDB, CouchDB. So it can actually be persistent, and we'll switch the ones based on whether or not we can actually connect to a CouchDB instance. So in the example I show later, it will be just using hash table. And if you bind to / if you do get to / you just get a description of the service. But if you go and ask for /attendee, you'll get a JSON representation. We'll go to this data access object, and it'll return the attendee. You can create it. You can put to do an update. We'll only accept the name, so you can change the name, but you can't change everything else. And and so on. And again, for rating, there's posting to post it. The attendee has to exist. If it doesn't exist, you'll get the appropriate return code. And again, there's quite a lot of code in here to deal with all of the different REST APIs. Yeah, the kind of hash map implementation is fairly simple. It basically just putting things in a map. It's more complicated for the session rating because we need to be able to get ratings by attendee and by user, so there's a lot more code involved. Java-jar next?
No, you can do the command line to start your service up.
What? What, from within IntelliJ?
No.
Yeah, okay.
There you are.
Okay.
Control-C yourself and increase your font.
This is the peril of working on someone else's laptop. That's
just doing them all like.
Yeah. Okay. So to start it up, Okay. To start it up, it's just as simple as doing java -jar Microservices. It extracts the Liberty runtime from the jar file to disk, starts it up, and then if I take this URL and go to a web browser, I should, fingers crossed, yes, it works. Usually I would panic when you do something live because it usually goes wrong. And back to presentation.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about your platform?
Yeah, the stuff on the next slide. So, the built-up jar file that we just ran is about 35 megabytes. It could be a little bit smaller, but that would have required me to make changes to the build. It starts in about 7 seconds, and it needs about 21 megabytes of RAM. I got this measurement by setting the max heap size to 256 because depending on what your max heap size is, that number varies because there can be a lot of dead objects on the heap that aren't actually in use. As you saw, our kind of Uber jar approach is you can use the Maven Liberty plugins, package goal, integrate it into your build instead of having a war file get an Uber jar. And what the java-jar does is it doesn't unzip and it runs the Liberty server. You shut it down, it undoes that. So in terms of the runtime, Liberty has something similar to Swarm's fractures. It has Liberty, we call them Liberty features. We have a whole load of the features for all of the Java EE specifications, and that means you can get the runtime to be really as small as you need it to be for the application. So in the case of the vote service, it is just CDI, JAX-RS, and JSON-P. The full Java reprogramming model is there if you need it. You just enable the right features. We have a load of extra features for other things. We try to keep Liberty quite simple, especially around configuration. It's configuration by exception, so you don't have very long, verbose XML files. And as with all server runtimes, we have to say it's lightweight and fast. So, Mike, there you are.
Okay. Thanks, Alistair. So yes, this is the Payara implementation. So our part of the sample app is the schedule service. So obviously, once you've got all your sessions in the app and you've got your speakers, then obviously you need to schedule as an attendee which session you want to go to and when. So the API is pretty simple. There's not really much to it. It's standard, well, same as the rest of them, standard CRUD REST stuff. So let's try and use a Mac. This is very foreign to me. Okay, so also IntelliJ, I don't really know that very well. We use NetBeans a lot in Payara. It's open source, it's good.
And it's Apache open source.
It's Apache open source, so I guess you'll be changing to use NetBeans for it. Of course. Yeah, we'll see. I'll believe it when I see it. So as you can see, there is very, very little in the schedule app. Those are all the classes that are there. much smaller than we saw with Alistair's, purely because one of the things that we did was make use of JAX-B for bindings. So we've got some marshalling and unmarshalling stuff there for date time stuff. But again, just a standard schedule data object, schedule data access object. Most interesting thing this really does is just get data from this demo Bootstrap project, which literally is just a loader. And then here's the API. Again, as I said, it's just a simple, really, really simple basic REST API. There's nothing in there that, if you've ever done this sort of thing before, will be foreign to you at all. So what I wanted to pick out on with the time that I've got is the POM. So this is how we're building things with the Payara MicroProfile. And because the way that we built the microprofile itself was effectively just to do another cut of our existing Payara micro code, which is takes much more of the Java APIs. So the way that we package this into an Uberjar at build time is to use the Maven exec plugin. So this is basically doing exactly the same thing that you can also do on the command line with just a single jar artifact, which is the Payara MicroProfile or Payara Micro, and then use the same command line options that we use there. So you can see there we've got output Uberjar, which is the thing that packages all these things like no cluster, auto bind HTTP, so that the resulting artifact is always going to have those settings. No cluster is there because at its core, Payara Micro makes heavy use of Hazelcast. So we've got things like a clustered CDI event bus if you wanted to publish and subscribe to CDI events across a cluster. And because that's not part of the microprofile, we've added that in just to make sure that we're not starting with anything that we don't need to, or kind of introducing any extra things into the demo app, but which you don't want to. We've also got auto bind HTTP, which is a handy little development flag where I mean, it can be used in production as well if you're having a high density of Payara micros. That will literally just increment the port if it can't bind to one. And then here we just deploy the resulting WAR file. So let's head straight to the terminal, and I'll show you how we do it. So it's Control-C. Excellent. So now I believe the port, yeah, it was port 6060. So you can see this just at the... Sorry? Hit up arrow and then... okay. There we go, that's better. So you can all see. So yeah, it's on 6060. And we've done that just with a ---- port. Again, we could have put that in the pom.xml, and it would just be completely wrapped up in the file. So by default, the port is 8080. That command will always override the default port. So if I was to build an Uberjar with a port already set, and then set it again on the command line, your new command line setting would be overridden. So those always get taken into account. So let's start that up. There you can see the logo and it's done. And actually this build time is, or the startup time is actually faster than it was on my laptop. So again, I'm going to go through a little bit about the characteristics of it. But this was done on my laptop where I unfortunately have to use Windows. So I've got a Linux VM. So all these are actually run inside a virtual machine. So on my virtual machine, it was a boot time of about 5 seconds. Just there, you saw it was about 3. So, you know, it's pocket change, really, isn't it? It's not big. The WAR itself is 60K. Packaged with the microprofile, it's 33 megabytes, so pretty much exactly the same as what we've seen in the other implementations. The heap usage, I've put it around 20 megabytes. So obviously when Heiko measured his, he just took the one sample and added the young and old heaps together. I did the same thing, but I took a few samples because it varies a lot, obviously, as you know. But yeah, I mean, it's all in the same ballpark. I was seeing the same kind of figures and the same kind of variations. At the moment, really, we're looking at sizes so small that the percentage variations that you get at those sizes are huge anyway. So it's I would say all of the implementations are small enough to not really make much difference. So our Uberjar approach at the moment is to use just the Maven exec plugin or the command line. I've just put the command line options there again. And at the moment, it's actually the focus of a bit of a redesign. Because what we've found with Payara Micro and Payara MicroProfile, as Alistair mentioned, that when we're kind of doing this ourselves, we're going through some of the same kind of pain that you guys are going through. I know that I was speaking to Alistair earlier, and he mentioned that in creating his application, he noticed that actually there's some of the behaviors in WebSphere Liberty that he doesn't really like and he wants to change. And I found that as well. So I raised a couple of feature requests myself in trying to get this stuff to work. Because the way that it works at the moment, it does the job, but it's not really as nice as it could be. So please, everyone who does investigate this and use things, do please raise issues against our GitHub and with the other guys as well. We really appreciate it. So just one or two extra interesting features. Hazelcast I've mentioned. And also the fact that in creating this microprofile cut of Payara Micro, that's led to a change in the way that we do our modularity. Purely because at the moment it's not in an ideal way, and it's leading us to make a few compromises that we would rather not make. So there is a potential for composability on the cards, which we don't have at the moment. But that's all very much future and the subject of some research at the moment. So with that, I'll hand over to Andy, and he can talk about Tomitribe's implementation.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Andy, Tomitribe. I was kind of given the task by David to pretty much sew this all together. So I created the initial project structure, created all the stubs for the project, and then these guys helped me fill everything out. Something that's been good for that is there's been a really, really nice learning process. I'm just going to go straight to IntelliJ, or go past IntelliJ. We've all seen each other's services. The Tommy service is going to be no different to any of the other services. We're all building applications. We're building WAR files. We're deploying. Something that we've not discussed is how easy this is looking. There's a lot of boilerplate code going on behind the scenes here. And these guys have put the effort in to make it actually look very easy. Our goal at the end of the day is to create a deployable jar file that we can throw out to some kind of node management system. And we've picked here Fabricate. So we're using Fabricate on all the profiles. That's something we're not going to demo today because it's still being developed. But the goal is basically to build a jar file or a WAR file that we will deploy to an image in our Docker cluster or whatever management system we're using in the background. So we've done the speaker service. And again, it's just a project very similar to everyone else's project. And we're going to have a resource that we're JAX-RS resource, and we're providing this service the same as everybody else.
Do you want to show the Maven plugin, maybe?
Sure. So yeah, we've got a plugin. We're building our executable jar using the Tommy plugin. So we have an exec goal, and that builds and packages everything. So we have an application. We're just using it in our IDE, the same as we're developing any other application. And this plugin will take your application, package it in a WAR file, sew it together with Tommy and deploy it in an executable jar file. And again, this is made to look very easy. So something that I've learned through this is using every other vendor's service is how they do it. and compare it to how we do it. We're all doing it in a very similar fashion. So this project, for me, is a showcase of how to do it. So if you need to work out how to do a microservice for Liberty Profile, then you can use this application as a template. And the same, if you want to deploy in Tommy, then you would use Tommy as a template. So all the information is there. All this boilerplate code has been put in place by us for you guys to use. The aim of MicroProfile is obviously to make that unified. So we all want to do things in the same fashion. And we've already encountered, I think ports was the first one. So the port conflicts, how do we set ports for our services? And that was one of the very first things that we had to resolve so that we could demo this on the same machine. And so that's a real focus. The next one is going to be configuration. So how do we override this? So we provide the configuration. And we all have a different way of doing it. So we all have a different string to set our port values. So that's one of the first things we want to resolve is enable the configuration and use the same configuration options so that when you build your application, you don't have to learn all the different options for the different plugins. Yeah, so we put that together and run that as our service. So I'll go to the service. I'll go past the service. This is the first time I've used a Mac, so. But I am getting one for Christmas. I promised myself one for Christmas. So this is the Tommy service running. I'll just kill that. And I'm not a Windows apologist. I actually quite like Windows 10. I think it's an extremely stable platform. Many of the customers that I'm consulting at, they use Windows. I need to use Windows in my daily work. And actually, by developing on Windows, I found a couple of bugs in some of our implementations specific to Windows. Created a pull request, got that fixed. So that's also been a benefit running this on the Windows platform. And again, you've seen in all the other applications, we just have a jar file that we've created. This is a fact jar file which contains basically Tommy, your war application, and all the dependencies required to run that application. And when we run it, you can actually see it's unpacked Tommy and fired up the application, deployed the resource, and done it in, well, 1.3 seconds. That's pretty fast. It's faster than mine.
I think it's actually like 3 because there's a Tomcat initial phase and then there's the startup phase that report 2 different numbers and everyone sees the second number and I think that's the only number.
That's the number I'd like to focus on, yeah.
Yeah, but it's about 3.
Yeah, okay, so we can go to our service. So our service was probably the most simple service. I think we put our hands up really, really quickly at the discussion phase and said, yeah, we'll do the speaker service, because we kind of knew that was going to be the easy one to do. Very simple API. We're just obviously querying speaker information, providing the information through the services. So our jar file, that comes out at pretty much exactly 35 megabytes, so nice and small. I've been more realistic in the startup time in the slides. It's 3 seconds. And our heap usage is 75. I don't know if we've used Alistair's trick to shrink that.
I don't think we tried adjusting the default heap size. I think that's actually one of the interesting things that's kind of come out of this is that we're all discovering, oh, let's all measure startup time and heap. And then we all tried different things.
Well, I think the nice thing is
so
we don't have to do any
numbers.
of that. We're just doing that to prove a point, but we don't have to do that. All our profiles run very, very nicely in default settings of Java, so you shouldn't have to apply any command line options for Java. You can see all these deployments are really, really small, really, really quick. We're nitpicking when we're, the difference between 3 and 6 seconds.
Well, we like to nit and we like to pick because we're engineers. So
yeah,
I think it'd be fun.
We want to improve it for sure.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to actually keep doing this and post the data on the MicroProfile website so people could just kind of get a snapshot of where everything's at. Because when you really look at all the startup times, they're almost identical. I mean, 5 seconds versus 3 versus, it doesn't really matter unless you guys don't have 2 seconds to spare. You probably don't have 2 seconds to even tell me no. It probably takes longer. So, everything's pretty much in the same range. Everyone's servers are about the same size of disk, start up in about the same time, and well,
Yeah.
we really come a long way from the old.
What was the term Heiko coined yesterday? Was learning our way forwards.
Yeah.
So brilliant term. We're learning our way forwards. So we're learning from each other. We're learning how to sew all this together to make your lives easier at the end of the day. So it's actually making our lives a little bit harder in an effort to make your lives much, much easier. Interesting features. Well, we're basically taking a naked Apache Tomcat. We don't change a single line of code in Tomcat. We're adding all the APIs to Tomcat, doing all the configuration and sewing that together. Adding one or two APIs to Tomcat's not particularly hard, but when you start adding more and more of the APIs out there, it becomes an increasingly more difficult task, and we've done that for you, and we provide various profiles. So we have the JAX-RS profile, which is our closest to a MicroProfile profile that you should be using. And we're fast, lightweight, and familiar, same as everyone else is, and an Apache 2 license. So I think that's worth mentioning is, we put our hands up and said, yeah, we would like to go to Apache Software Foundation, but because we're collaborating on this, there were less hands for Apache Software, and we moved to the Eclipse Foundation, which I'm looking forward to, because I haven't had a project on Eclipse Foundation ever, so that, we're going to be learning some new processes there. And then finally back to the code. We've sewn this all together in a web application. So this web application...
We'll try and do 5 minutes on that so we can get the closing slides in.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Or less.
Or less, yeah. I'll be really quick. So this is basically a Node application. Initially, when I had to do this, it was a kind of choice. What are we going to use? Well, I wanted to be right at the cutting edge because we're doing something at the cutting edge. So obviously, Angular 2 and Bootstrap 4. So this is kind of a really good template project. I'm fairly proud of it. The version on this one isn't the latest version. It's on that box, but it was too hot of a pull request this morning to get it across and put it on this machine and then break everything. So the latest UI is not the current UI. But yeah, everything's been done through sort of best practices, and again, it's been learning my way forward, doing an Angular 2 project with Bootstrap 4. So this should all be running on, is it 8080?
I believe you said it was 8,000, so localhost 8,000.
Oh,
that
yeah,
brings
that's
up the UI.
yeah, we got it's the NPM server that we're using. That's great. Yeah, so this is basically a very, I won't say quickly knocked up GUI because it's been a serious learning curve to get this all put together. But this is a full-fledged Angular 2 Bootstrap 4 application pulling data from all of our services.
Yeah. So this is all 4 servers running on the laptop with one UI pulling data from all the microservices. So effectively, this is the ta-da moment of seeing all the work come together.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we've made it look easy. We've all got our fat jars. We've deployed our fat jars. If we're imagining that's running in a Docker cluster, everyone's running in a Docker cluster. I can cluster this UI application as well and scale that elastically how we want. So we've provided the entire architecture for you to deploy to an elastic deployment. I think I used Aaron Gupta here. The sessions are obviously coming from the session service, and clicking on the session service, I get more details. And we have the votes and the schedules, and these are the things that I unfortunately can't demo this morning. We're using full calendar, using PrimeNG, so the Angular 2 Prime integration. So again, something that's made to look very simple is actually very difficult to do, and you can use this as a template or a starting template to say, how am I going to do this? Literally, fork this and just change the code to meet your needs. And votes, very simple view, just pulling in the votes from the vote system. The latest version does have an a pie chart and a bit more information, but again, it was just too scary to do the pull request this morning. That said, the pull request this morning could have been done because we're active, everyone is active, there's lots of people who contribute to the code, and that was the reason I didn't want to merge the pull request, because it wasn't just mine, there was other people's, and we haven't done the reviews. But that's nice to see that even as we're stood here, there's people working on this project to provide the information for you guys. And I think it's now back to David.
Does this work? All right, perfect. Okay. All right. So that's just the demo portion here. And so the interesting thing about this, so one, this is a GitHub repo. This started, actually, we broke into the code maybe August, something time. Anyway, so there's about 355 commits on that. There's about 21 contributors. Ivan Ivanov is one of them. He's in the room. So there's a lot of activity going on this, even though it's just a small little thing. I think the coined phrase that Heiko had yesterday, learning our way forward, is kind of a fun way to describe it. How often have you seen all the vendors work in the same code base, using their technology together and dealing with the pain of it? I think that's the kind of the fun thing that we're just like rolling our sleeves up and trying it out, and the community is obviously with us doing that. We've seen everybody supports an Uber jar. Everybody has a way of setting the ports via the command line or their plugins, and all of the ports are conveniently different. That's all the flags are conveniently different, so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. I think that we can get out of the way in terms of fixing up. One of the things that we didn't show, persistence. Okay, so none of these things actually saved data anywhere. And so I'll kind of explain why for the moment. But another one was security. So we get this going. We'd never actually logged in. You're running as an assumed user on all this stuff. And so that is probably one of the first things that we will try to do in terms of the roadmap of the next iteration of the MicroProfile, which, as I say, we're intending these things to iterate pretty quickly, like 2 months time frame, not 2 years. And so we had a lot of discussions about, well, what should we do with security? We know, hey, we support this thing called a JOT. Yeah, we do that too. Yeah, we do that too. Yeah, we do that too. Everyone's doing that. So we're like, why don't we just acknowledge this, right? So we all line up our stuff, and we realize we all have a way of setting, doing UberJar slightly differently. That's fine. We're probably going to be able to keep the slight differences, but maybe things like the command line flags for setting the port, that could be the same. We all have some sort of concept or the ability to plug in something that can maybe help you output Swagger. But what would the path for that be? Well, why don't we agree on a path where you can always go and get something like Swagger? If we're all supporting JOTs and JSON Web Tokens, so to speak, then why don't we agree on where the user is going to be found in the JOT and what the roles are in the JOT, and that we all have to be able to verify a JOT via public key? Because we're all basically doing it, but we don't have any standard way of a user setting that up and knowing exactly how it's done, and a guarantee, right? So it's basically us writing that kind of stuff down and saying, this is a guarantee you get with something that's in the MicroProfile. Other things that could be kind of worked out is caching. I know Payara and Hazelcast have done a lot of work together. We're working with Hazelcast now in terms of making sure that works. It actually does already. And so Hazelcast has hopped up on the project since it launched, and they've actually been rolling up their sleeves and themselves digging into this very sample app and trying to figure out how to work that stuff into the ecosystem, which is a very kind of interesting thing because, like I say, it's a use case driven thing first. But all those things are a potential roadmap. But like I say, we did not include persistence in there because we wanted to ask you what you wanted in something like a MicroProfile. So rather than load it all up with what we think is the best thing, we intentionally came out with the absolute bare bones minimum amount of specifications that you can possibly include and get something that is useful. So you can add your own persistent stuff on top. The microprofile is not meant to be like you're supposed to stop. That's a base, right? And so, we did come up with a survey, and I'll kind of show you some of that data. But basically, we wanted to make sure that the community had means to discuss these things and decide what should be on the roadmap and what should be next. Another thing where we didn't include a whole bunch of specifications in there is, if we're trying to make things faster, we can't keep doing the same thing that we were doing before. If you have the choice between delivering 12 things every 2 years or delivering, one thing every 2 months, at the end of 2 years, you come out with the same, but you give people things in a more incremental fashion. So not tackling conversations like persistence allows us to at least establish a baseline of, yeah, we all support uberjars. Yeah, we all have low memory profiles. Yeah, we can, do basic configuration via plugins or via the command line, with all the stuff packed in the app. And that's kind of a base. It's a good ground to stand on, right? A lot of people don't really even know that that's possible with what they would traditionally consider an EE-like server. So we did get about 3,000, close to 20 shy. After we leave this room, everyone's going to go to the microprofile.io website and take the survey. So we'll top 3,000 later today, right? Okay. And so this is the kind of responses we got. We guessed pretty good. JAX-RS and CDI were pretty high. HTTP2 and OAuth are probably the next two down. And so I think that kind of matches up with what we've discussed in terms of what we thought the next logical thing to add to the microprofile. Obviously, security via OAuth is high among the list. At least validating a JSON web token that some security gateway gave. Things that came out high in terms of concepts, like what's important to you, we asked. Startup time was the highest rated thing of all the questions we asked. That had the most number of votes, almost 1,000 put it as their top priority. We asked people to rank 1 to 5. Memory was the second highest. And that came out pretty high. Metrics actually received a pretty decent response. I was kind of not surprised, but I thought it would be mentioned, but it ranked basically 3rd on the list. And then, having some sort of answer for reactive-based stuff also showed up, which, we were discussing at the BOF last night, something we can probably do behind the scenes of the existing JAX-RS API, just start making things asynchronous, have some sort of observable thing that gets passed into the method, but that probably won't be immediate. Things that did not do well on the survey, disk space, surprisingly, no one cared. Once you get down to 100 megs or something like that, no one cares, especially if you're shipping this thing around in a 400 megabyte Docker image. As Alistair mentioned, he could probably shave 5 megs out of the distro, but who cares anymore? It's disk space is cheap these days. Now nobody's shipping on DVDs. This is all very low, but we're basically at a point where it's not high on anybody's list anymore. Uberjar, surprisingly mediocre, even though we're all doing it. It seems to be, people are comfortable with what's there. Then we had some other kind of fancy things that we asked that just did not show up. Interesting things that we were thinking about maybe doing next. We discussed in a lot of the Java 1 talks and talks like this, what we're doing, because we're all having these things to work together, services interoperably, is, there is a lot of room for us to improve interoperability in terms of one service talking to another. and how it fits architecturally. Something that we could potentially doing is focusing less on the APIs inside the VM and more on the interactions between the services at an architectural level, and maybe come out with something, say, that's called MicroProfile interoperable. And that might be you have to receive a JOT and a JSON message. You have to be able to put data in a NoSQL storage, have a health check endpoint, and if you can do that, you're MicroProfile interoperable. And Spring Boot could easily fit that thing, and we can basically have a kind of architectural definition of what it means to be interoperable and swappable. And that can enable things like, you know, security gateway vendors to go, all right, well, I can talk to any MicroProfile interoperable implementation because I can pass them a JOT with a public key, and I have the 2 standard fields in there at least. And we could have maybe a list of things that are capable of interacting with something that's MicroProfile interoperable. Metrics and stats, if we did come out with something that had standard metrics and stats, you know, there's a lot of vendors like New Relic and things like that we could potentially convince to market their product as being capable of talking to anything that's MicroProfile interoperable. I think there's a lot of room that we can do in this space, and I think it's an interesting thing. An idea James Strachan came out with the other day, I'm just going to include it in here, is why not make a start.microprofile.io? As you can see, we've all worked out the bootstrapping code in a Maven project that has the minimum number of POM settings and dependencies set up. So why not just put up a little website that allows you to click the stuff that you want, say the MicroProfile implementation you're interested in, and boom, it generates you a start project. We actually run all of the MicroProfile IO website is all open source code. So if someone wanted to start hacking on something like this right away, you could just go to the GitHub project, fork the website repo, and start digging in. It's all written in Java with Angular front end, and it's pretty easy to get into the mix of it. In terms of roadmap, we're trying to keep things relatively focused. So the format we're getting ourselves into is bring your ideas. We're going to have a couple weeks of conversation, and then we will all commit to something and do that one thing for as long as it takes to get it done. So 1 month, 2 months. And then we will have another round of open conversation. We will all talk. We will all argue what is the most important thing to do. We'll make a vote, and then we'll decide that's what we're doing. And we'll keep that iterative process going, and that's how we're going to keep our velocity going. So we have a project where you can file ideas. That's the one to look at. So MicroProfile/evolution is a GitHub project. Is a GitHub repo, file issues there, or just talk on the mailing list, and that's the good way to go. Good things to do is, get your JUG involved. We have Sao Java, we have LJC. If you have your local community, bring them up here. But otherwise, go to the website, and thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed the talk.